Good evening, everybody. My name is Herb White. I'm editor-in-chief at The Post, and welcome to our third installment of Legends and Legacy, our Black History Month programming. And today we've got pioneers in the media space, folks who were part of Charlotte broadcasting and print when opportunities did not necessarily present themselves to folks who look like us. And I'm not going to do too much gabbing, but over here on the corner, that's Gerald Johnson. He's the publisher of The Post and the person who greenlit this project. And to my immediate right is no stranger to anybody who's been in Charlotte for any amount of time, Ken Koontz, who is one of the first black reporters at WBTV here in Charlotte, who went on to become a media entrepreneur in his own right in public relations as well as video production. And to his immediate right is Fannie Flono, who, although you all may not have seen her face, you have read her work in the Charlotte Observer as a columnist for many years, and also editorial page editor? Associate. Close enough. And so we are going to talk about their time in the media space, the past, the present, maybe, and even take a peek at the future. So give our guests a hand. So I will start the conversation in terms of how you all got started in this. And since I've never had this opportunity to ask that question of Fannie or hear her answer, you can go first. Yeah, just turn it on.
There you go. All right. So what the question was, how did I get into the business? Well, boy, it's a kind of a circuitous route, I guess, in a way. When I was a teenager in the 70s, you guys probably, some of you weren't even born then. I know you weren't. That's right. I was living in Augusta, Georgia, my hometown, and I did not see anyone who looked like me on TV. And the newspaper in my hometown was so white, in all of the ways that you would think that it would be white, and that black people were not portrayed in a very positive way, that I immediately thought, that I wanted to be somebody who could change that narrative. And so when I got to college, I decided to major in journalism and wound up interning at a couple of newspapers and began to see how I would be like one of the first people to be in the room who was of color. And so that was my first kind of introduction into that. And when I graduated from college, I went to an HBCU, Clark College. Now it's Clark Atlanta University. And when it was probably I think the second graduate in their journalism program, and went on to work in papers in Florida and South Carolina, Georgia, and then came to North Carolina, and came to the Charlotte Observer as an assistant state editor, and was still one of the few black people in the room. And so, things were changing very slowly during that time, and I'm sure Ken can talk a little bit more about that, how it was here in Charlotte. But it was very clear to me that the voices that needed to be in the room needed to be people who look like me. And so that's how I got into the business and remained here in Charlotte for 30 years until I retired in 2014.
Very good. Thank you. All right, Ken, how about you?
As I look around the room, I first recognize that I'm probably the oldest person in the room. Anybody here over 76? Y'all lying. Y'all just trying to make me feel good. How old are you? 80. 80? Yeah. My Lord, how about you? 77. Good gracious, don't they look good, y'all? I got that to look forward to. Well, first of all, thanks to the Charlotte Post for having me to be a part of this. And one of the words that I hear thrown around a lot is legend and legacy. And I just like to caution people to understand that, you know what they say about legends and legacies? Anybody know? Half that shit ain't true. But, and as far as I'm concerned, let me tell you why part of it ain't true. I came to WBTV News as their first newsroom employee of color in September of 1969. Now, however, I was not the first person of color in the Charlotte market. There was a brother named Bob Nicholas, who was a native-born Charlottean, lived on Jennings Street, and I'm not sure where it was that he worked. But it was 1969 that the Kerner Commission came out, which was a combination of CBS Network and Columbia University School of Journalism, who studied the Kerner Commission and concluded that we were two newsrooms, or we were two Americas, one black and one white. And that included the newsrooms across the country. And to that extent, they combined effort to integrate newsrooms that they could impact, and CBS was one of them. But WSOC, which was then an NBC affiliate, beat WBTV to the punch in that they hired Bob Nicholas. And Bob Nicholas was on the air about 4 months. But if you ask anybody in Charlotte who Bob Nicholas was, unless it's his family, they probably not able to tell you. And probably because WBTV, being the first TV station and very strong number one, nobody was watching SOC anyway. And he was only on the air there for 4 months before a Houston, Texas station snapped him up in May of '69, and he went out to Houston. So when I came in September of '69, yeah, I was WBTV's first, and for many people, the first and only black person they knew at that time. But in, I think it was February of '70, a brother named John Blunt also joined us from Philadelphia. And John became more present, more visible than I, because he was an anchor. And we just recently were featured in a special segment of WBTV recognizing their 75 years in broadcasting. So let's get that out of the way first. Yeah.
It's only an hour show now.
Huh?
It's only an hour show, so
Oh, the hour show?
we only have an hour to be in. And you didn't answer the question, but go ahead.
Oh, I started back home in Beaumont, Texas, my hometown, as a writer for our high school yearbook in 1966. And from that, it grew into joining the guys on the air as a color commentator for high school football, and at that time, black high school football. And these disc jockeys at the black program TV radio station allowed me to come and join them and tell them about football and color and the band, because I had been a player in football and a participant in the band. And that grew on me to the extent that they actually made me a morning drive news, weather, and sports guy. And all I did was really rip the AP wire and read it. And then in '69, I met Dr. Newsom. President Johnson C. Smith at our Alpha convention in Houston expressed the desire to come to Johnson C. Smith, and he gave me that opportunity. And so on August of '69, my dad and I were on a plane to Charlotte, where I enrolled at Johnson C. Smith, and they hooked me up with the interview at WBTV, as they, a CBS station, was committed to desegregating their newsroom. And my career started there, and I owe everything, not just to WBTV, but those of you who were your mom and dad's remote controls at the time. Boy, go turn that channel, that colored man figure to come on. So thank you all for watching and continually being a supporter, and I hope that's enough to get us through this hour.
A quick question before you all get off with that. You didn't automatically, well, help us understand when you felt like the career that you ended up in was the career that you wanted to be in. How did that spark hit you? Either one of us start.
How did I realize that this was the career I wanted to be in? Well, to be honest, I always wanted to be a writer. I mean, I always saw myself as a writer. I mean, I used to, my family used to, my mother she had some land on a farm, and I used to go up there and just write. So I always knew I wanted to be a writer. Didn't know I wanted to be a journalist until I saw, what the landscape was like. And so I guess I understood that I had my niche in my first job. Well, my first job in Lakeland, Florida, where the Ku Klux Klan was still riding around and talking. And the editor, I'm the only black person in the room, and they asked me to interview the Klan. So, it occurred to me that there was a reason why they wanted me to do that. Maybe they thought I'd fall on my face. Maybe they thought they'd scare me out of the business. Maybe they thought, that I couldn't handle the job. But I was curious to see what a Klan member would say to a black person. And it was clear to me in the interview that in this country, some white people can compartmentalize. This guy talked to me like I was just like a regular person. It wasn't like he saw me as a black person, unless he saw me as the exceptional black person or something like that. But it was interesting to me. It kind of crystallized in my mind that to understand and to actually help people see what the country was like and see how we could change to be something better, that there had to be people like me who could talk to these people, tell the story, and put it all into context. When I graduated from college and I sent out newsletters to see if I can get a job, there were actually people who wrote back to me and said, we don't hire black people. And that was surprising to me in the late 70s, that was still the case. But it also made me understand that we've got to get in there. And I don't care if I'm going to be the only one or the only few or whatever. Somebody has to be the start of kind of infiltrating this thing and kind of changing the dynamic. So, there have been a lot of little instances that kind of confirmed for me that I was in the right place. Here in Charlotte, when we did our Taking Back the Neighborhood series at The Observer, I was very interested in having black people at the table to discuss with leaders and politicians face to face. And I had the opportunity to make that happen. I'm in the right place. When I wrote about poverty in North Carolina and had these legislators who said, there's no dire poverty, there are no black people in poverty, I had an opportunity to put it out there in the paper, show what was happening, and I knew I was in the right place. So there have been opportunities for me to actually be confirmed in that.
My experience in desegregation is probably different from a lot of people I've known. My dad was the principal of an elementary school in deep South Texas near Corpus Christi that desegregated their county in 1955 when separate but equal was outlawed. And so my experience in a desegregated society started in my third grade year. And unfortunately, once we got 45 miles outside that area, full segregation was at its best. And as far as the Klan is concerned, in my earlier days at WBTV, when I went out on a story, for the most part, WBTV's reputation in the community was so highly regarded that they were willing, I guess they did, discount the color issue and went with the fact that WBTV was here. And Virgil Griffin, who was back then the Grand Clagle or whatever the chief Klansman is for the state, and I became, I won't say best of friends, but we were very cordial and respectful of each other, even at the time that he and the Klan, attacked those people in Greensboro and on camera shot and killed several of them and virtually went scot-free. So when we wanted to do an interview, it was I who called Virgil Griffin to set up an interview for him to come to Charlotte and do an interview with our anchor, Bob Inman. In South Carolina, Fritz Hollins was running for re-election in the state Senate, in the U.S. Senate. And I was down there with a black photographer, and unbeknownst to us, the Klan shows up. And of course, all eyes turned to me because we were the only black things in the, it was about 150 people, and all eyes turned to me to figure out what I was going to do. And I simply approached the guy and asked him for an interview, and he respectfully said, "Yes, sir, I will talk to you, but let me first hear what Senator Fritz has to say, and we'll do the interview," which he did. And I never had any reason to fear or anything like that, because again, I was wearing the moniker of WBTV, and nobody was about to take on the WBTV. So I had that in my favor. Now, if I had gone down there and said I was from WGIV, they may have told me what to go. So that was my experience, and my dad's experience of having been the principal of an integrated community. And then he was a very personable guy. And from the third through my high school senior year, I was always in the school where my dad was either my homeroom teacher, school principal, or in the same school where I attended. So I walked the chalk line. And so that made me, by default, be a pretty good guy. And I just used that to manipulate and figure out how I was going to go up the ladder. And I always wanted to be, I guess, a journalist, starting my high school years. And was very successful at that. And the time I came to Charlotte, I was stringing for a black publication, weekly newspaper called the Forward Times out of Houston. And they had a stringer that covered our area called the Golden Triangle, Beaumont, Port Arthur, Orange, Texas. And I would do stories for, his name was Boogie Belton, and I would do stories that he would actually write and get the credit for, but I was the one that actually did the legwork. And when I got to Charlotte, it just went on from there, and had a great career and appreciated it, including the experiences I had early with the Charlotte Post when your dad used to cover us when I was playing semi-pro baseball. I got a few headlines in there.
Now, in terms of your careers, as time went on, you became entrenched. Everybody knew your face, or in Fannie's capacity as the observer, her words, if not her face. As your careers unfolded, talk a little bit about opportunity, because you two were, for many years, the lone faces in places where black folks weren't allowed or weren't whatever. But as time went on, talk a little bit about the opening of opportunities for black journalists, or was that all a facade and it's always been kind of like there's only going to be one or two that get in and that's about it?
Well, for me, Charlotte was always my ambition to live and make Charlotte my home. My mother was from here, and so that side of the family was here. Johnson C. Smith was rich in my blood, and so it was always a desire to come to Charlotte. So, but once I got here and the opportunity presented by WBTV, that was the defining time and event. And going through that as a reporter, and then as an anchor, and then as director of community affairs my last 3 years, it was from that last position in 1980 that I concluded I better start rethinking my long-term goal. And the reason was that Ronald Reagan rolled into Washington and started deregulating the Federal Communications Commission, which governed broadcasters. And when he said you no longer have to do relicensing every 3 years, you can do it every 7 years, strip the fairness doctrine, I saw a lot of things that were happening that I read as the handwriting on the wall and orchestrated my decision to get out of that and take the advantage of my name recognition and started a public relations agency. And WBTV was my first big client. And so from there, entrepreneurship was always in my fore. And I finally retired from transmissional satellite media as the owner of a company called All Stars Communications. And at the time, I was only the second black man in the country that owned a satellite uplink truck, the first being a brother in Washington who chose to stay there and do the government 8A set-aside program. And I never signed up for one of those programs and had a very successful career. And then these doggone Skype and FaceTime and phones like that kind of forced me to the sideline. And I said, this is as good a time as any to get the hell out of this business, and I did.
Well, opportunity. You know, when I got into the business, my goal was to actually open up a lane for other blacks to kind of travel down it as well. And so when I came to Charlotte, there was already a guy there named Al Johnson. I don't know whether any of you remember or know Al Johnson, a black man who was the regional editor for the Charlotte Observer. And it was through him that I got to the Observer, and several other black people came after me through Al Johnson. So there was already someone who was actually plotting a path for other blacks to get into mainstream newspapering and go further. I mean, a lot of the people who came in with me at the Observer went on to the Washington Post and to the New York Times and other places. I stayed at the Observer, and not because I didn't have opportunities to go elsewhere, because in this business we were still very few in the ranks countrywide. So, when they saw a black person at one paper, they thought they could, get them to go to another paper and do, and have, they could be that black person of record at the paper. But I stayed at the Observer mainly because I got opportunities to do some things here that I really want. And among those things was to help the newspaper recognize that there were people of all stripes who deserved a voice at the table. And I wanted to make sure that when I left, at least, my voice would be ringing in their ear about, I know they don't want to talk about diversity, inclusion, and equity now, but I wanted to have that voice ringing in somebody's ear when I left, that should always be a goal. And that's not lowering a standard, that's broadening the base, that's including everybody who could actually move this city forward. And I think, that here in Charlotte, we do have a base of people who are doing that. We're not, where we need to be, of course, and we're still working toward, a goal that seemingly right now seems so elusive. But my goal has always been to, have the ladder not come up behind me, but have people able to get on that ladder and kind of go forward. And hopefully I achieved a little bit of that.
Did you all ever, being African American in this business, being the few in places that you worked, did you ever have any incidences where you were confronted with your race and How did you handle that?
Okay, all the time for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I had that. I mean, and I'm sure that you guys in your jobs are confronted with it too on the job. I mean, not only you have to deal with outside people. I got hate mail, people threatening to kill me all the time. I mean, I got so much of it that the white people were surprised, and they came to me and they said, "You getting hate mail?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a black person in America. That's what it is." And so I did get a lot of hate mail from, all around. But I also had to deal with inside my own business. There were people who were racist and who felt that I didn't deserve it to be where I was, and some of them who tried to manipulate things behind my back. But fortunately for me, I had people also, blacks and whites, who were supportive and would always let me know when there was this treachery going on afoot. And so, I was always aware of what was going on, and I know a lot of people at the end said, I knew where all the bodies were buried. So, I mean, I had something on everybody, because I would tell them when I heard that they were doing something. I would let them know that I knew, and I thought that was the best way to go forward, so that they knew that I was going to be looking at them as well as they were looking at me. So, yeah, I mean, it is just part of the lay of the land.
The beauty of it for me,
30 years old.
Yeah.
the beauty for me was the fact that I was at WBTV, a very strong and dominant number one. And while we had a very conservative president of Jefferson Pilot Broadcasting, Charlie Crutchfield, who did daily editorials, and many of which were very conservative, including anti-busing, he was smart enough to understand that times were changing, and he had a management team behind him who were much more liberal and moderate than he ever was. And in fairness, WSOC was way ahead of the game in terms of hiring minorities than WBTV was. While I was the only black in the WBTV newsroom in my earlier days, WSOC hired, subsequent to my being at BTV, they hired at least 3 other blacks who were in their programming and news. One of them was a frat brother of mine named James Smith, who, like me, was an intern at WBTV, at WSOC. And then there was a guy named Durwood Hall who did a Sunday morning community affairs show. He was a big football player at Johnson C. Smith. And so WSOC was, you might say, almost light years ahead of WBTV, but WBTV got its props because of its market dominance. Now, also, I want to say that there were 2 people who come to mind that I always have to give their props and respect to. One of them was a guy named Kurt Peters. It was he and his father-in-law that I met in Houston at our convention. And when I expressed my desire, Dr. Newsom said, "Well, son, I don't know, we may or may not have a scholarship for you, but we will figure something out, and if nothing comes to fruition, you can always have work-study under my son-in-law," who he introduced me to, Kurt Peters, who was Director of Public Relations. Turns out Kurt Peters went on to become one of, if not, I believe, the first black television news director in the country when he took the job at WLOS-TV in Asheville, and subsequently came to Charlotte as the news director, the first news director at WRET back then, which is now WCNC, as their news director, and subsequently went on to Bell South. And Kurt is one of the most humble guys, if you want to believe that, you know Kurt, that you could ever want to meet, because he impacted hundreds of black folk getting into this industry we call broadcast journalism and journalism as a whole. So I always give him those props. That's one person. The other, his father, well, the guy standing behind that camera, his father was the vice president at Johnson C. Smith when I came in '69. And I had admired and worshiped him years before I got here because he had been the head football coach at Johnson C. Smith. And one of his star players was a guy named Pettis Norman, who went on to become a 9-year veteran with the Cowboys and then the last 2 with the Chargers. But it was Dr. Jack Brayboy, who was really a staunch supporter of mine, and I had the distinction and the honor of doing the last on-camera interview with him before he passed. And so it almost chokes me up a little bit when I talk about Doc, but the name Brayboy always has a great place in my heart, and I appreciate the fact that he was very supportive of my foray into the business as well.
So now, moving forward to modern day, obviously the media business has been transformed, not necessarily for the better. It has changed. Many parts of the industry have been hollowed out. New parts have been created. What are your impressions of the media landscape today and those opportunities that we talked about that were not necessarily overflowing back in the day? What is your impression of modern media? Print, broadcast, internet, smoke signal, whatever.
Well, the smoke signal for me was when Reagan started deregulating broadcast industry. He eliminated the fairness doctrine, which meant stations no longer had to do these requirements of being sure when you told one side of a story, you got the other side as well. He did away with the requirements of licensing, and my responsibility at WBTV was to secure our license and what the public wanted from a television station. And as those things were eliminated, it became obvious to me that I better rethink where I am and what I'm doing. But a lot of it, when I think about today's media, I'm not very impressed, and especially at the local level. Number one, they can't write, and not all of them. Number two, my English teacher told me a sentence doesn't begin with "at," and it's, almost daily you hear somebody say, well, police are still looking for the suspect, but nobody seems to know where he's at. Well, I can tell you right now where he's at. And then in addition to that, they don't do as much in-depth. Many people come through here on their way to something bigger and better, even back in the day when I was there. But as a young man, as a boy, I always wanted to make Charlotte my home. So when I got at WBTV News, I knew whatever I was going to do, I was going to do it in Charlotte. And so that was my thing. And as far as today's reporters, I ain't impressed with local media. And to one extent, and this is somewhat of a joke, I was watching news one night. I forget which station. I forget which station it was, but I said, oh my God, look at the talent tonight. And then the devil jumped on me and says, damn, where the white people at? Because the program was basically anchors, both news, sports, and weather were all black. A couple of the lead stories were black. Uh-oh, there's somebody listening.
Maybe from a TV station.
Oh, but nonetheless, I just don't see the depth of reporting, and especially as investigative reporting goes, like we may have experienced. I know that I have experienced. So as far as local media is concerned, I ain't impressed. And as far as national media is concerned, I'm not impressed, because now you can't believe hardly anything anybody says because you don't know from what angle they're going. So that is me. But then again, you talk to anybody who's 76 years old, they're probably like the same thing. Like I had to ask young people, what the hell did Kendrick Lamar say? And then once they explained it to me, I said, that's great. That's depth. And then what did media do? they jumped on the whole bandwagon about the beef. Hell, the story ain't the beef. I'm gonna have to call you back. You know, this is the thing. At the end of that thing, it should have been a big thing across the top. Said vote. Otherwise, y'all just talking loud and ain't doing shit. Pardon my French. Because voting, if y'all, that young demographic, had voted, we might not be in the position we're in today.
Fannie?
I'm sorry.
Well, oh gosh, what to say? You know, I am disappointed in the media. I don't think. I always like to have something positive to say. Because I'm not in the media landscape today where it has been compressed, where people are having to do 7 or 8 different kinds of jobs, and so I do understand the pressures that they are under to do the best they can with a lot less than I had to contend with when I was in the business. So I acknowledge that. I do think that that the media has some of it has devolved into this much more of a he said, she said kind of a business than when we always thought that there was always a way to have some perspective to help people understand what was going on. I think there's less of that, and that's to our detriment. But of course, there's also the issue of the disinformation that's out there that is so powerful, and that I think probably the public school system, there hasn't been enough of the foundation for young people to understand that everything they see and read is not true, and especially the things that they see on Instagram and Facebook. You have to always verify. I had the opportunity to teach a class at Davidson a few years ago, and one of my big things that even at that time was helping kids understand how to find good information and how to recognize when they were being duped by disinformation. And I think that's so important these days to help all of us to understand, how to sift through all of this crap that's out here, and understand that a lot of the stuff that you're reading is not true. To find where you can get verifiable information. You can still get it at some places. I mean, not as much as had been previously, but there are places where you can find good information, and you have to just kind of keep digging and seeking that. And I know people don't want to dig and dig. I mean, we really want to, we want to have things quick, and that's why people tend to kind of take in this disinformation. I do think there are opportunities. Some of those podcasts that are out there, I think are really good. I mean, I've listened to some of them, and so I think there are opportunities when you can have information that's not a soundbite, where you can get good information, but you always have to be skeptical of what you're reading and kind of seek another source when you're getting it. And so it's hard to kind of just condemn the media wholesale for what's going on. I mean, that in some ways, the media is a victim, as the rest of us, to the craziness of particular people who are out there who are just bringing us all down. So I don't know. It's very hard. For me personally, there's still a vital role for the media, and so I don't want to give up on the media. As I'm lumping them all into one group, I don't want to give up on the media. I think that we all need to put pressure on the media to do a better job. Make them give us information that we can use to make good decisions. And if that means, sometimes you gotta, call them up or be out there protesting, do all the things you need to do. But, we gotta put some pressure on people. I mean, this disinformation, it's killing us. It is just so insidious. People, they put stuff out there they don't have to lie about, but they lie about it anyway. And I said, why are you doing this? And it's just it's such a volume of it. So I'm not giving up on the media. I think that there are pockets where it's done very well, and we just have to lift them up when they're doing very well, condemn them when they're not doing very well, and keep pushing to get better. We deserve better. We got to push for it.
Let me just throw a comment in on this, because the biggest thing that's happened to media in general is when we lost our independence, because large companies start buying up the media and start dictating what editors can do. And once you start doing that, and the editor can't control his own staff, because the upper echelon is telling him, well, you can't print that anymore, you can't do that. Even with Bezos, when he told him, he came out and told him that you can't endorse Kamala Harris, you aren't going to endorse anybody. And so when you have that kind of input coming in that's controlling media, then you just lose all of your ability to have any good media coming out from those places now.
And to that point, not to get all preachy here, you also have scale, where big publications can, when you have a Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post or the LA Times killing editorials, and you take away that independence, it kind of gives you what you need to know as a roadmap in terms of independence. Are you so tethered to the billionaire owner who runs the entire show, as opposed to the smaller independent groups that are putting in that work and will carry out that mission?
That's true.
Just something to think about. But before I cough up a lung, let's do some Q&A, because I know you have questions. So let's get started. Anybody?
No. I'd just like to commend the two of you all for the work that you've done in the community, for the longevity, being pioneers of journalism in the Charlotte Observer, with WBTV, making the difference that you have made. And with doing that, Ken, I know you said something about legacy and these things are lives, but you all have created legacies for our young people to follow. If they read about you, they'll understand some of the things that you've done. And you wasn't trying to create a legacy, but you were just doing the work.
To that point, I often wondered if, when I was at WBTV as a startup, in my first, well, I say 15 years, from 69 to, 84. I wonder if the people who then, at 70, 75, 76, thought about my generation as I have tended to think about the generation now.
Yeah.
Circumstances were a lot different. They looked to us for a certain level of being honest and open about the things that we covered. But for me, one of the things that I have established special, unique relationship with is young people.
Good.
Because like I said, I didn't understand what the hell Kendrick Lamar was saying, but there are so many younger people who did, and they could school me on what it was he was saying and why he was saying it. And then it all hit me. They're absolutely right. However, what's the going forward? What is it? y'all talking a whole lot of stuff, and you're really loud about it, and you got everybody hyped up about it, but I don't see y'all at the vote, at the ballot. And that's where the rubber meets the road. There's a coffee shop down here called Archive. And that is where I encounter these young folk who come in there with their laptops, and they ain't coming in there to sit and play video games. Those are young entrepreneurs. Those are young people working in great jobs with corporate, but they get the benefit of working from home, which we never heard of. And so I have endeared myself to them as they have endeared themselves to me, to the point that now when a young brother comes in and says, hey, OG, I don't get offended. You know, I wear that with a badge of honor. Because he first of all spoke, and then for other young people say, well, what was it like when you came along? Or what was it like when? And there's my chance to talk to them about what it's going to be like for your future. Because for the most part, I'm done. But then I encounter these folk, oh, I got a whole lot more to go and to do. I ain't done, but they got a lot more ahead of them to do than I will have. So building that relationship. We as seniors, yeah, like Gerald, we really have to endear ourselves to these young people because whether we like it or not, we're all in the same boat. Let's paddle in the same direction. So that's where I come down on the side of OGs versus the young whippersnappers, as I call it, or youngsters. And I hold them in very high regard because their opinions matter.
Well, let me say it this way. I don't think that biases have changed or necessarily new, but the number and type of choices haven't increased or maintained integrity in telling both sides of the story. How do you think we can turn that around?
Well, I think journalists got to get away from the promotion, marketing, and PR of news and return to journalism, not being swayed because in our day coming along, the guys in the sales department never crossed the line of coming down to news and trying to tell us what to cover or what not to cover. And that was a corporate mandate. You leave news alone. Let news do its job. And thereby we were able to do stuff and uncover stuff regardless to where the chips may have fallen. Even I, as a black reporter, sometimes drew the ire of black folk because I had broken a story about something we had done as black people and in official positions. And, you know, so be it. You know, I ain't changing my story, and I'm certainly not going to kowtow to your ire about what I did. I can live with myself. I haven't had a night that I wasn't able to go to sleep and sleep well.
Well, you know, I always used to tell the reporters who work for me that there are often more than just two sides to the story. And to be open to having your preconceived notions dashed. I mean, we all come to things with our own biases, when we're going to look at things. Keep those in mind, you know, because often, you know, they ring true. But be open to hearing somebody say something that upends what you thought you knew, because we often don't know as much as we think we know. Be willing to take in information and use it to help people think. You know, I always think the best journalism is journalism that helps people think. People sometimes would say to me about some things that I would write that I hadn't thought of it that way. And when I got somebody to say that, I thought I was on the right track. And particularly these days when you have so much disinformation out there, if you, if a a person who is in this field of journalism is willing to go into a story and look at it as not just two sides to the story, but there might be multiple sides to the story. And that all of these voices matter in helping us come to a solution. I was always about solutions-oriented journalism, helping the community find a way to find a path toward doing something that changed something for the good. And if we can all kind of see it that way, that we're all in this together, obviously, but we're all looking for a way forward to do something better, and that there are millions of voices that may help you do that, and help coalesce those voices toward a better path.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that some of the disinformation is due to unconscious bias because of the pressure to get a story out quickly? And then part two question, just curious about your role in your career. Did you research all day and then write all night? I mean, what was that like?
Sometimes.
Yeah. In my coverage, there are two things that I completely detest, and I see it running rampant now. One of them is the word racist. I detest that word because it's a social construct specifically designed to divide. And when I say that, I don't know that gentleman there, but if he said something that I may not necessarily agree with, and then three of us meet later and say, oh yeah, he just racist. That is so unfair, because I have known people who have been more humane in their treatment and differences with other people than many of those who consider themselves flaming liberals or people who are willing to accept others. I say that because God created one race, and it was called the human race. And as a result of that, all the things that dropped out were various ethnicities, backgrounds, and the other thing that I hate is that term of the black community. Nobody's a monolithic anything. And when you lump all people under one category, your chances are you're going to miss the mark a whole lot. And therefore, I find it easier to have a conversation with somebody I may vehemently disagree with because they're willing to admit they have prejudices and not necessarily under the construct of being racist. They can have prejudices, they can have insensitivities, and they can have what my dad used to say, ignorance. And ignorance ain't bad, that just means you don't know. But if you don't want to know and don't try to know, that's when you're stupid, and that's, that's for life.
Yes, sir.
I want to speak to the black community. I would like to see just teachers, principals, ministers, black newspapers to speak up more and telling the children, seek out the truth. If there's anything that your parents have taught you that you find to be false, then you will hope that parent would tell their child to go on to a deeper truth than they ever knew. But what I'm saying now is lying and everything has become the norm. And not just in the media, but in the schools, everywhere. And it's just so much dishonesty. And kids have no more values in terms of knowing right from wrong. Wrong is okay if they can get away with it. So I just believe we need to just really speak up more to what you were saying, but seek out the truth, because we're not getting it from our government.
When the Civil Rights Act was signed, Lyndon Johnson said, "We just lost the South." And he was somewhat right, but then again, out of that came the slogan back at the end of the Civil War, the South shall rise again, forget hell. And now we're seeing the fruition of that slogan. And the reason I say that is because I think we've moved away from our core. You've heard the term, it takes a village to raise a child. With the signing of the Civil Rights Act, our village began to disintegrate. As many of those who were the elite of the neighborhood, who may have lived next door to the woman who was a housekeeper at the hotel, who may have lived across the street from somebody who worked for the city sanitation, across the street from a lawyer, but we were a cohesive unit. And what your kid did, my parents could chastise. We don't know our neighbors now. And then the best of the village left the village to go and live with the oppressors at 80% of their median incomes, and then position ourselves as if we're equal. And what we left behind was the least of the village to fend for themselves. We only go back to get our hair did or go to church. And even churches, when the last time anybody went to a church at night service? You know, so we got to take a lot of responsibilities of where we are and why we are, and quit trying to blame other people for everything wrong with us. Because as you recall, coming out of Reconstruction and the Jim Crow, the reason Jim Crow came was because of successes that we were building. Because within ourselves we had to depend on each other. But then the other side of the tracks, oh no, we can't let them there be, taking over us. So we have to look the man in the mirror and say, where did I, impact this whole thing? So the least of us, we call the hood now. That is not a term of endearment to me. And the village that was disrupted because other people made us feel like we were welcome to come and live with them at 80%. Nah, hopefully that can change. It won't change until we take a hard look at ourselves and admit our role and where we are. And the schools are no longer education systems, they're quasi-social service agencies.
That's deep.
And on that note, it is after 7, and we appreciate our guests and their wisdom and their experience and their service, and we're going to call it a night. If you
Before we go, Joe, y'all hiring? I need a job.
No.
Thank you. Also, before we go, keep in mind next week's panelist is a solo act. Dorothy Koontz, one of the first black students to desegregate Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, will be our guest.